It's Monday, August 26th. I'm Dan Titus. It's a hell of a day to talk ball. And joining me is Tera Roberts. Welcome, Tera.
Hey, how's it going?
It's going great. And I understand you just came back from LA. I haven't been able to visit the Playa Vista office yet, but how was your first studio appearance?
It was beautiful. On the pod, I said I was happy to be in California and not in Texas. And for the record, everybody, it's because I live in Texas and it's like unnecessarily hot, hotter than it should be physically anywhere. And so California was the happiest weather break I've had in a long time.
Yeah, as a California native now, I can agree with you. It's probably scorching hot in Texas. So we'll welcome you to the California family whenever you're around. Say what's up. We welcome you with open arms. And if you guys haven't had a chance, make sure you go back. It was Convictions Week last week. Her and Andy Behrens broke down their favorite breakouts of 2024. Really good episode. So make sure you go back and check that out. And unfortunately, this is the final mock draft Monday. Why? Because real drafts are actually getting underway this week. I have my first auction draft in one of my favorite home leagues this week, so I'm really excited for it. But I know most of you guys will have your upcoming drafts this holiday weekend. So on this pod, we're going to do everything to get you prepared for those drafts. We could consider this the official cram week for all those people that haven't had a chance to look at the rankings, do mock drafts, listen to all the podcasts. This is what this is culminating to. All of this in 1 week. We're going to get you ready. Tera, I know schools are just starting to open up around the country, but for fantasy managers, this is the final exam. All right, so for today, we're going to round out a 10-team half-point PPR mock draft. And essentially, it's the most common format for the Yahoo Fantasy app. So we want to make sure that we're going to give you guys the best information before you get ready for your draft. So we're going to go through 4 of our top takeaways, trends that we saw that we want to make sure that you're prepared for. But as a point of emphasis, I think it's always important as a fantasy manager. I'm always looking at these things. To prepare for your draft, you got to know when people are going. And Tera's done a phenomenal job over the last month tracking where these ADPs are moving. Are they falling? So Tera, I kind of want to know, what movement are you seeing up and down draft boards? Like, let's start with the risers. Who's some of the people that you've seen kind of go up over the last month?
Little spoiler alert, we're going to talk about some of these guys, I'm sure. But the rookie quarterbacks are essentially sailing through ADP. It'll be fun to see how it matches up with our mock draft to how the overall ADP is going. But guys like Jaden Daniels and Caleb Williams, they're looking fantastic in preseason. They're out there just fucking looking incredibly mobile in the pocket, finding the big name receivers, and their ADPs are absolutely shooting through the roof with their rushing upside. So those are 2 fun ones. Guys like, again, more rookies. Malik Neighbors, surprisingly, is going up in the rankings. We're seeing some wide receivers falling. That one's kind of interesting. A guy like Chris Olave is falling a little bit, which I get because he's not in the most amazing quarterback situation. So these trends have been going on all throughout the offseason. Preseason has been affecting them a ton. And it's just been really fun to track them and see kind of how the drafters are viewing these guys, especially the new ones, and how they're moving them up and adjusting them.
Right. So that's part of the tips and tricks, guys. You got to know when to draft certain players and make sure you're not missing the boat on other ones that could be rising. So I think that's really good advice from Tera. And if you haven't, make sure you go back, check out all her work on the Yahoo Fantasy app on the Yahoo and on yahoofantasy.com. She does great work there. But Tera, I want to pull that thread a little bit more. Let's just talk about the quarterbacks and what we saw in this mock draft here. Top tier QBs all seem to go in rounds 4 and 5. What's your preferred draft strategy there with the position so deep? Like, are you trying to spend up in the rounds 4 and 5 for those top tier quarterbacks, or are you okay with waiting?
So this has been a really weird one for me because I'm very pro this season, especially. Very pro. You don't have to grab one of the elite guys. You can wait. It's extremely deep. You can take risk as well and maybe draft a guy that you're not sure about, because when you hit the waiver wires, especially in 10-team leagues like this one, there's going to be plenty of startable streaming options every single week. So you don't have to kind of panic and you can wait it out. You don't have to jump at guys. But ironically for me, as I'm doing mock drafts, as I'm doing my redraft leagues, I've been oddly enough taking quarterbacks early. It's not intentional. Again, it's just kind of how how the boards are falling. Like in this draft, for instance, I took Kyler Murray in the 5th round. It was right after Anthony Richardson went off the board. And right before CJ Stroud. So I was kind of like smack dab in the middle of that end of the quarterback runs there in that 5th round. And it's just been really, for me, kind of relaxing drafting quarterback because you don't really feel pressure. I've been leaning into the early guys, but you don't have to. I don't feel like I'm panicked and like saying, okay, I don't like the value on this guy, but I have to take him. And it's been really interesting seeing how all of that is flowing. Oddly enough, I have been taking a QB1. I'm not going to lie. I'm going against, what I've been saying, but it's really about how the board is falling and how you want to take it, because these quarterbacks can go literally anywhere throughout the draft. There's so much depth.
You're right. I think it's really about playing how the board comes to you. Because I think I had the 2nd pick in the draft, and I drafted Jalen Hurts in this, and it was right after Josh Allen. And you'll see throughout round 4, all of those main players, Josh Allen, Jalen Hurts, Patrick Mahomes, Lamar Jackson, all of those guys went in the 4th round. So you could jump on the bandwagon and try to jump into that QB arms race. But in certain situations, if you don't have a good draft position, like if you're kind of sitting on the outskirts there, kind of like how you were just describing, like I'm okay with taking a Kyler Murray, or potentially a Jaden Daniels, someone that I want to talk about a little bit more and that you touched on as one of your risers. But I think in this QB, with the QB position so deep this year, it's really a choice of whether you want a dual threat quarterback or whether you're okay with a pocket passer. And more often than not, I find myself drafting those dual threats with a pocket passing backup. But that doesn't always unfold, especially in a 10-team league. So I think you could just play the board. If the value is there and you see a good dual threat quarterback available for you, go ahead and grab them. If they're flying off the board and you see a better valuable wide receiver or running back, I think you can go that way too, because there's just going to be so many options available for you, especially in a 10-team league. But let's go back to Jaden Daniels for a second, because what is your take on him? And is he one of those guys that you're going to be definitely targeting if you miss out on, say, these top tier QBs, or are you okay with, like, say, a Dak Prescott?
So I still love Dak. It's funny because Dak is one of the guys that's kind of like that borderline. Do I take a guy like Dak, or do I reach and go for Jaden Daniels? And the more and more we go through this preseason, the more comfortable I get with reaching on Jaden Daniels, because, and we've talked about this in the podcast a lot, and I talked about it with Andy Behrens last week on our Breakouts podcast, where, of course, Jaden Daniels was on there. I talked about him. He's everywhere, right? You can't do a podcast at this point and not talk about Jaden Daniels. But he is right at the end of that QB1 for me, around QB11, QB12. And he's the last guy that I feel inclined to reach for and that I want to snag. And then after that, I'm uncomfortable with waiting for some of the guys. I don't mind like a Jared Goff and skipping over your Tua Tagovailoa, your Brock Purdy. If you want to wait just a little bit further and push it back, there's guys like Trevor Lawrence. But I mean, Jaden Daniels has just sailed right past all these guys, right, in ADP. And we saw it in this draft where we had a nice little gap there after that kind of Kyler Murray, CJ Stroud, Anthony Richardson range. We had a little bit of a 2-round gap. And then we had Joe Burrow, then we had Jordan Love, and then in round 9, remember 10-team league, round 9, we had Jaden Daniels go off the board. And I feel like that was a beautiful spot to take him because, if I hadn't taken a quarterback 100% and he was available, I would have done it, because other guys that you're looking at in that round, there was Brian Robinson that went, Titans went that round, Evan Ingram, David Njoku. They're all fine options, Tony Pollard as well. So they're fine options, but you kind of get out of that high-end wide receiver range, and I feel like that's a great time to jump and take a risk on a guy like Jaden Daniels, who again was and the number 1 guy in my risers column this week. Just sailing, really. He's been so impressive. Again, this preseason, this last start that he had 2 series, 10 completions, 12 attempts, 78 yards, had some rushing yards on the ground as well. He's just absolutely been thriving all off season. And it's crazy. He lost Jahan Dotson in that trade. We've got that big news that came through, and now the primary target will be Terry McLaurin. I'm sure we'll talk about that later when we go to receivers. But even with the loss of Jahan Dotson, I feel like this receiving core can step up for him and really help him thrive.
I was waiting for you to mention it. That was the big news, the hot topic
Yes.
late last week when Jahan Dotson was traded to the Philadelphia Eagles. Kind of a guy that, unfortunately just didn't amass any of the production that he had his rookie season, but he's got a new home. Perhaps Kellen Moore can unlock something a little bit more out of him. But yeah, that was gave me a little bit of concern, or maybe a little bit of hesitancy on Jaden Daniels, that he was losing a pass catcher of his caliber. But I think Tera is telling you guys to get ahead of the curve, because if you look at, courtesy of 4for4, their ADP data, right now, Jaden Daniels is going in the 10th round, and she spent up a round earlier for him. So this could be the trend we see going into the holiday weekend of Jaden Daniels kind of climbing up draft boards. So after the break, we will get to the running backs, the wide receivers, and the tight ends from our latest mock draft. Okay, we are back. Tera, we just touched on the quarterbacks. Running backs, pretty standard, I would say, through the first round. I think one point of emphasis was that Bijan Robinson leaped Jamar Chase in this mock draft. Is that something that you're anticipating that we'll see as we get closer to this week of drafts? Just given the fact that Jamar Chase and some other wide receivers potentially could be holding out here.
Yeah, I've been doing a lot of live Q&As on the Yahoo social channels, and that is one of the most common questions that I am getting around those two running backs, around Breece and Bijan. I mean, they're kind of interchangeable. I have Breece as my RB2, but really they're both fantastic. And a lot of questions coming in asking just how far we're pushing him up, because both of these running backs up, because everyone, we tell them, okay, Christian McCaffrey, 101, right? Tyreek Hill, you can't go wrong with that. CeeDee Lamb. But again, you've got CeeDee Lamb with this contract situation. We'll notice that Tyreek Hill went second overall in this draft, surpassed CeeDee Lamb. I don't think that's super controversial, but it's something to note with him dealing with the contract issues. Then we also have Jamar Chase dealing with the contract issue as well. So these wide receivers are kind of getting flip-flopped here. We had Justin Jefferson. That was an interesting one. We have Justin Jefferson as well, falling back, no contract issue, got the big payday, but he has Sam Darnold at quarterback. Yeah. I know people either feel one way about it or complete opposite way. I'm not too happy about it, but him falling back as well is just kind of pushing these running backs up. So we had Bijan go 4th and Breece 5th. I think it's fine. It really just comes down to personal preference in terms of, how risk adverse you want to be. I don't think that CeeDee Lamb is going to sit out for any reason. I think Jamar Chase is maybe a little bit more controversial because we've heard some strange rumors about that. But I would anticipate, again, he'll be ready for the season. But if you want to, it's not the worst thing in the world, because these are our top 3-tier guys, right? There's that little break right there between them and a guy like, Jonathan Taylor and Jahmyr Gibbs in terms of either sharing the backfield or sharing it with a rushing quarterback as well. So looking at those running backs, I completely understand taking them in the top half of that first.
Yeah, it seems like there's only going to be a consensus in 10-team leagues, 3 running backs going. That's CMC, Breece Hall, and Bijan Robinson. But it gets really fun in the second round, because that's when the running backs really fly off the board. That second tier of running backs that you're just talking about, starting with Jonathan Taylor, Jahmyr Gibbs. He had the preseason injury. It kind of impacted his ADP, but I think we're starting to see it climb back up now that he's getting closer to the season. Perhaps he's healthier. Then you have Derrick Henry. You have Kyron Williams, who always carries a large workload, does have some injury concerns. And then you got Pacheco. But the guy that I want to talk about is Saquon Barkley. This guy had a first-round grade in 12-team leagues, and he was going right around that number 12 spot. He dropped to 18 in this recent mock draft. Is that something that you think will continue? Will he continue to slide with news that in camp that he's a little nicked up already? And we know, Saquon has a history of injuries.
I mean, that's the concern, right? That's that trigger thing where you get these certain players that have a history of injury. And with a guy, like if you were to say, hey, Bijan's got, a little tweak, you don't panic, right? Because there's not that history there. But with Saquon, you do get a little bit nervous because an ankle has been known to take him out for a few games here and there. So yeah, I get it. I do. I understand why it's falling. It's not affecting me that much because while I'm not big on avoiding Saquon, by no means is he someone that I'm saying will be a bust or we're pushing away from him. We need to avoid him. I haven't really found myself taking a ton of Saquon, quite frankly, when I'm, because it's coming in an area where you can say, okay, I want the stable young running back in Jonathan Taylor.
Sure.
Maybe I want to go with the massive touchdown upside. Ironically, I feel like when people think about Derrick Henry and that Ravens offense, they're like, well, Lamar Jackson runs. Lamar really doesn't run that much at the goal line compared to a guy like Jalen Hurts. So Derrick Henry, with the huge touchdown opportunities there, I took Kyren Williams in the second round. It's a controversial pick. People feel a certain type of way about it, but I've been very pro Kyren this offseason. But I feel like people are coming around just a tiny bit because there was the whole fear of Blake Corum coming in there and all of a sudden that he's going to force this to be a committee, and then Kyren's touches are just going to go down so much, and he's the smaller back and he's got the injury issues and whatnot. But when I look at Kyren Williams and the safety of him, it's interesting because I feel like Sean McVay specifically told us they drafted Corum because he's so much like Kyren Williams, like a replacement when he goes down for an injury, right, not somebody that's going to overtake him or be a complimentary back. So I've been super comfortable with taking that high upside pick. But just the second round in general for these running backs, these are all high upside guys, right? These are all, it's crazy because they're not the first round, but these are all guys, when I'm looking across the board, maybe with the exception of Isaiah Pacheco, I feel like all of these guys could realistically finish as top 3, top 5 at the least backs if, things go a certain way for them. So the value that you mentioned here for these second round running backs, Saquon dropping here, lean into it. Him at the beginning of the second has been a little frustrating for me, but if he's dropping, take advantage of it.
That's the point I was going to make if you didn't, because I was just a week ago, I was saying, me and Harmon were agreeing that Saquon looked like the bust of the first round, just given where you were drafting him. If you're telling me Saquon's going to fall to 18, I could get with that. Like that's the right price to pay for someone that you're banking on. You're already inherently banking on that risk of him getting hurt. But the upside at that cost, I mean, Devon Achane was the next running back to go off the board. And, what I'm saying? He's in a timeshare and he's had some injury concerns as well. So I think if you can get Saquon as a late second, like that's really good value for a guy that's going to have the best offensive line he's ever seen. Sure, he will lose out on some of that red zone work because Jalen Hurts is one of the best running quarterbacks we've ever seen and efficient in the goal line area. But I don't know. I think I would take Saquon if he fell to me that way. But then you mentioned some upside there, and I was kind of surprised to see Devon Achane go right after him. Is that someone that you've seen kind of get pushed up draft boards? Because I think he was more of a third round pick. He's probably a fourth round pick, and he's kind of been steamed up to a third. But like to see him go into second, I'm like, are we going to continue to see this steam going forward as we approach this weekend?
Yeah, I'm with you. That one surprised me a little bit. But hey, get your guy. No, I haven't. I haven't seen Achane moving up. Ironically, I have seen Mostert moving up, which makes sense, right? Because I feel like Mostert is the forgotten guy, right? You sit there and everyone gets so hype about Achane and everything and the upside that he offers. But Mostert was literally a top 5 back last year in half PPR, literally in all formats, really. But I get that he's 32. I get that he's an older running back. Last year was ironically the highest workload he's had of his entire career. But at the same time, he's not going to get phased out of this offense. So if you're fading him, it's literally only for age and injury risk, not because he is no longer going to be a part of this committee. So yeah, I feel like people are starting to remember, Raheem Mostert. Wow, the value, that's pretty good. That's excellent value for a guy who led the league in rushing touchdowns last year. I think I'll jump on that. So yeah.
It's crazy. Yeah. I was just looking at Mostert and, he's per 4 for 4. He's an 8th round value in 10-team leagues. He went in round 7 in this one. So hey, your analysis is spot on here. He's moving up draft boards. I think, as we get into these home league.
Practice what I preach.
Exactly. See that? But I think it more so speaks to the fact that I think we're going to start to see, as we start to see the people that don't pay attention as much as we do to this stuff, remember the fact that Raheem Mostert was so good. And if you're talking about a cost, hey, this guy saw a significant workload and you're getting him in round 7, round 8. You don't have to spend up for Devon Achane and the risk that provides. Yeah, you may limit some upside, but if you're going to save floor, you want to go for a high-end wide receiver in the second round, I understand why you would. And then you can maybe fall back on a Raheem Mostert. So super interesting. And on Raheem Mostert, I think he's right around that time where, if you missed out on a top-tier running back or even, running backs in rounds 4 and 5, you start to approach that dead zone around round 7, round 8. I think the dead zone in this one was really round 8. Some of the names that I saw come off the board in round 8 were Chase Brown, third pick of the 8th round, Javonte Williams, and then you have DeAndre Swift. So how are you really approaching the dead zone? And what is your strategy this season in general? Are you trying to get the top-centric RBs first and then kind of settle in with an RB2 in those mid to late rounds, or how are you kind of approaching that?
I always enjoy a good hero RB strategy, and it's so easy to do. We talked about the second round this year. It's so easy to get your hero in round 2 and then just call it a day until you get to round 7, 8, 9. I feel like the dead zone I'm not completely avoiding because there are some guys I like in there. I like Chase Brown in there. This was maybe potentially a little bit higher than I would have taken him in this draft going early, round 1, 10-team league, but he's definitely a guy that I, like leaning into. DeAndre Swift is interesting. Then you can dip into the Tennessee backfield if your preference is Tony Pollard or Tajay Spears. Tajay Spears is my preference. I took him in the 9th round as my 3rd running back off the board. Guys like Jonathan Brooks. So there's dead zone value here with these guys, but I think I prefer to at the very least, snag one before you get to that. Let's call it the Javonte Williams level right there. I feel like that's a good place to say, I feel like that's a good little start to saying this is the portion of the dead zone where I start to look at it a little bit sideways and say, would I have preferred a round earlier to get a Zamir White? Would I preferred to get a James Conner, who are not quite in the dead zone? They're just right before then, the nice stable running backs that we think are going to have those 3-down roles. I feel like you dip in right there, maybe cut it off at Najee Harris and say everything after that. You can dive into it, but don't let that be your first running back off the board because a lot of these guys have shaky roles.
Yeah, they do. They have shaky roles. And, someone I've never been high on is Najee Harris, but in wake of Jaylen Warren's injury and his hamstring, those hamstring things can linger. I would never feel comfortable with Najee Harris as my RB1. So I think your strategy is sound. Make sure you get a top tier running back. And then the RB2, you can kind of pick your choosing, your musing, whoever you kind of feel like might be the best fit for your team. One of the names that's popped up here for me is Tony Pollard. And I'm like, I didn't understand why Tony Pollard went before Tajay Spears. So when you said you scooped up Tajay, I was like, oh, that's great value because I haven't found a situation where I've really been prioritizing Tony Pollard just based on what we saw in his workload last year and the way Tajay Spears was actively involved with Derrick Henry next to him, who was a by far better running back. I think people may be discounting how effective Tajay Spears could be, especially in a half PPR league where he's going to be catching a lot of balls. I think that this dead zone to me, I'm just really trying to avoid it as best I can. There are some people that may be valuable. Zamir White, I know, isn't a popular name in fantasy. Don't really love the fact that his advanced metrics don't look great, but I do like that Antonio Pierce is going to make a concerted effort to run the ball. You get a starting running back, in round 7, round 8, that's pretty good. That was also pretty interesting that Alvin Kamara went in the 7th round. I don't know if this may be just people watching the New Orleans Saints and being like, yo, this offensive line is trash. Derek Carr, he's the dump off king. But Taysom Hill, there's been a lot of conversation in fantasy circles here. And shout out to our customer success or customer care team who made a point to make sure that, Taysom Hill has his QB and tight end eligibility. We're like everybody else. But this guy is going to be maddening, not only for the New Orleans Saints, Alvin Kamara, Jamal Williams, but also for fantasy managers. So
yeah,
are you buying do you think that Alvin Kamara should fall as a result of how we're seeing Taysom Hill constantly be utilized in the red zone and as pretty much a de facto running back, H-back, fullback, tight end, whatever, he's the Swiss Army knife?
I think you nailed it there with Alvin Kamara. It's weird. Just the flashy news, like preseason and off-season news can greatly affect how people view certain running backs and or wide receivers as well, certain players in general. If you get those Malik Neighbors hype videos, you love Malik Neighbors. If you hear the tweets about Taysom Hill is going to be used as a jack of all, he's so talented, he can be used this way and that way, he's just gonna be a focal point of our offense, then the result is that you get an Alvin Kamara dipping in ADP. And so I think that's the issue there, is that people feel maybe a little bit uncomfortable with him because of the issues with, and I don't think it's Derek Carr, because I think Derek Carr kind of benefits Alvin Kamara.
Yeah, he does. He does.
Not Chris Olave, but Alvin Kamara. And so maybe it's just giving people the illusion, but I think that value right there for Alvin Kamara is excellent. If he had fallen, I took Raheem Mostert 6 picks later after that, I would have taken Alvin Kamara at that value. It's just, he's one of those guys where it is a pure value play here because he is going so late. And we've got this perception that he's no longer an elite running back, but he put up fantasy numbers last year. It's frustrating because you can get more out of him. And I think that's the issue. If those numbers had come out of, like, let's say those were Zamir White's numbers this season, we would call that a win. We would call that a huge win. Yay, we did it. But you get that out of Alvin Kamara and you're disappointed because you know that he can be so much more. So I think that's kind of the issue there.
Yeah, I think that's fair. And to your point, yeah, I would certainly scoop up Alvin Kamara if he fell to me in the 7th round. What are your thoughts on Gus Edwards and like that whole Chargers backfield? Like, is that something that you've prioritized? I know he's one of the prime dead zone running backs there. Do you have confidence in him? Obviously, he's familiar with Roman's system, and Jim Harbaugh's now in there. What are your thoughts on that, on approaching that backfield?
I have a lot of confidence in his ADP. The value is just, it's so right. If he's there, I'm taking him. There's no reason he goes in such a nice range. It's a weird situation because I don't know. We know that the Chargers are going to be run heavy. We know that more than likely he's not going to be the only running back, but there's just so much of an unknown in terms of everybody else. Does J.K. Dobbins finally stay healthy or even healthy-ish and play like even half a season? Does Kamani Vidal step up? And, we were thinking we were pushing him up and thinking that he was going to be the rookie darling that breaks through. And then we kind of tempered a little bit, but now it seems like he's getting a little, positive feedback of, possibly pushing up a little bit more. So there's so many different directions that backfield could go. But at Gus Edwards' ADP, I mean, I'm leaning in. It's one of those like free, it's a free space in bingo, right? If it hits, fantastic. If it doesn't, you didn't make a big investment, so it's okay.
And that's where I'm at with it too. And that round 11 is like dead zone gold here. You got Gus Edwards, Austin Eckler, Nick Chubb, Jerome Ford. I mean, if you want to go the Rico Dowdles and the Trey Bensons, you know what I'm saying? So like at that point, it's just really a crapshoot. And I would take at least the guy that I know is the top of the depth chart, which is Gus Edwards. I think that's extremely valuable there. If you miss out, on these running backs in the middle rounds of drafts. Let's pivot to the wide receivers, though, because wide receivers are holding out, at least the main ones. You don't seem, at least I haven't seen too much of an impact in terms of ADP on CeeDee Lamb, Jamar Chase, but Brandon Ayuk, though. What are your thoughts there? Because I feel like he slipped in this draft. I think he went in the 5th round, if I'm not mistaken. He's usually around a 4th rounder. And I mean, is he getting traded or what?
This is the most frustrating one. You're right. Like when it comes to the contracts, I'm like, it's been a while. Like I feel like Jonathan Taylor was a very unique situation last year because he had the injury issue that could afford him the ability to sit out and not really have a major issue. But when it comes to CeeDee Lamb and Jamar Chase, the likelihood of them just sitting out massive games, it's just so slim. But Brandon Ayuk is such a weird situation because, I mean, any team at any time, like what if Pittsburgh pops up and decides, you know what? never mind. We're actually going to offer you more. We're going to up the ante. We're going to make it more appealing. We're going to, really give, Brandon Ayuk, we're going to throw some more money at you. Say yes. The deal is good. The problem is that we know that San Francisco will and is perfectly fine with trading him. And it comes down to the money situation for Brandon Ayuk. So there's about 5,000 different directions that this could head. For all we know, Washington has a reverse change of heart and says, hey, Brandon Ayuk, we want you here and we'll make it happen. And we'll pay what we need to. So this one has been very frustrating me in mock drafts. And I hope that it gets changed before I get into some of my redraft, real drafts next week and the week after that, because it doesn't just affect him, right? It affects Deebo Samuel too. Like, imagine, Brandon Ayuk goes. I mean, Deebo Samuel is just going to be pushed up draft boards ahead of these guys like that have a little bit shakier situations, like, a Devontae Adams, a Chris Olave. He can jump all of those guys if all of a sudden Brandon Ayuk is gone. So I feel like we're just kind of in no man's land waiting for this, because it's happening, not happening. We don't know. Brandon Ayuk, it could be the situation he goes to could be so much worse. And then you've suffered in terms of value if you drafted him in round 4 or 5. So I can't stand this specific situation. Brandon Ayuk is the one that I struggle with. I did draft Deebo Samuel here in the 4th round. You can lean into him a little bit because the value is still pretty good on him. But taking that risk on Ayuk is just, I struggle to get there.
Yeah, I think it's an avoid for me. At this point, there's just too much going on behind the scenes that I don't know when he's going to actually show up, even if he does wind up signing with the Niners. As you said, there could be some mystery team that's trying to get into the sweepstakes that we don't know about. We've seen what the Steelers offense looks like. It's not that great. So I could see them kind of pushing their chips in or upping the ante a little bit more to kind of secure getting him over there. That's too much of a headache. Yeah. Don't bother. Just take Deebo Samuel like you did.
Exactly.
See, wonderfully put. He's going around that 3rd round anyway in 10-team leagues, but I think it's totally fair that we see Deebo's stock kind of rising. Now with Ayuk's situation just kind of in peril right now. Like, we don't know what's going to happen, and I don't think as a fantasy manager you can honestly trust going into your draft rooms spending that 4th rounder for him when we don't know what that outcome is going to look like. Wanted to touch on next person. Just in general, Michael Pittman, I feel like it's very polarizing right now. Harmon had him as a potential bust at cost right now. He won the 3rd round of our draft. That's kind of where he's going. Do you have confidence in drafting him this year? Being that, AR-15 is coming back. I think that his last preseason game, they looked really good together. But Josh Downs seems to like being a guy that's definitely creeping up draft boards as well. So do you have confidence in Michael Pittman?
I love Michael Pittman. I'm a Michael Pittman stan. But it was easier to be a Michael Pittman stan last year when you were getting him at that extreme depressed value than it is now where he's being pushed up draft boards. I feel like this one was a little bit too high for me. I mean, even as somebody who just has stood on business for Michael Pittman ever since, for his rookie year. Going before a guy like Nico Collins, I don't know about that. Mike Evans, I can't get there. I can't get there. I'll push him over a guy like Chris Olave for sure, because it's a strange situation there. But this one was just a little bit too high for me around Pittman. It's not that I have any worries about him. I don't think he's going to be a bust, but I feel like it's just like slightly above where he should be in terms of ADP, because we could get, low-end wide receiver 1 Michael Pittman, or we could get high-end wide receiver 2 Michael Pittman. It's not a drastic difference, but when you're looking at some of these other guys on the draft board that have that kind of top 5 potential, like Nico Collins, we saw it last year, you've got that top 5 potential, and I don't know if Pittman has that. So I would prefer him just a little bit further down, but that is still my guy. I still love him.
Yeah, and the other guy who I had on my, if we're talking about wide receiver bust, I think it was right around the same area, was Malik Neighbors. And are you a fan of Neighbors? Because I'm not. It's Daniel Jones for me. Like, that guy just kind of ruins the upside and appeal. Like, target share aside, I get it. I'm just saying that, like, that guy won't be able to sustain, wide receiver 2 upside with Daniel Jones throwing him the ball. Like, the game script definitely favors him because the Giants aren't going to be good, but I'm just like, he just doesn't look that great at quarterback. So why are you going to hitch your fantasy season on a rookie with a quarterback that hasn't shown any pure competency and been able to sustain a wide receiver one ever. Like they haven't had a wide receiver one since Odell Beckham was there in 2018. So yeah, I'm just out on Malik Neighbors, 4th round, 5th round. I'm just not really drafting. If he falls, okay, maybe we get to like round 6, but he's not going to go that far. I think he's consistently been a round 4, round 5 guy, and that's where he went in this draft, round 5. So where do you stand on Neighbors?
I get your concerns. I do. Because it is Daniel Jones, and a great year for Daniel Jones in the past has been like literally, like statistically, the worst year for Jared Goff. So I mean, it's difficult to think that Daniel Jones is really going to push forward and be able to support Malik Neighbors. But I'm on the other side. I'm leaning into it. I'm keeping the faith alive here with Malik Neighbors, just based off that pure talent. And I'm not going to lie. Kate took him in round 5, a pick before me.
Ooh,
she sniped me. She sniped me right there. I pivoted to Kyler Murray. Again, we're playing the draft board here. We talked about that with the quarterbacks here. Just play the board as it happens. So I was sniped on Malik Neighbors, and instead of like saying, because next receiver off the board was George Pickens, and again, that's kind of a weird situation there with the quarterbacks, and it doesn't inspire me. So instead of that, I said, you know what? I'm not gonna reach here. I already got my tight end, so I'm just gonna go ahead and get my quarterback here and suffer the consequences of missing out on my Malik Neighbors pick there. Because I get that, I get that the upside could be. He does not have that Marvin Harrison Jr. upside purely based off the offensive situation. But he is so incredibly talented, and I feel like the range for him is fine. I don't know if it's a draft at your ceiling kind of situation or, cross your fingers that there's a little bit more. But at that point, I feel comfortable with him because we start to get into a range of guys that are, have a little bit shaky situations as well. Like, let's say maybe a Rashee Rice who doesn't have a shaky quarterback situation, but maybe we don't know 100%, off the field. We don't know 100% what's going on right there. A T. Higgins, he's the wide receiver too. We don't know, and he's been, God love him, he's my Clemson guy, but he's been very unreliable in terms of health and consistency. So I'm okay with going with Neighbors before them because everybody's got their problems in that range. They've all got their problems, and I'm going to lean into the talent of Neighbors over some of those other guys.
Am I crazy for saying that I think in wake of Jahan Dotson getting moved, I would rather have Terry McLaurin than Malik Neighbors?
You're not crazy. I agree with you on that one. As soon as I get the free time and update my rankings, fingers crossed here.
What is free time? Come on, strap season. We ain't got no free time.
It's been a busy week. I was in California. It's like I'm playing catch up here. Yeah, I'm going to be moving Terry McLaurin up. And I've seen some other people are saying it doesn't really affect Terry McLaurin because what was Jahan Dotson really doing? And I get that, but we also have to remember that Curtis Samuel is not there as well. So there is a lot of stuff being pushed out of that offense. So when we're looking at how this affects Terry McLaurin, he could finally be in that perfect situation where he has his quarterback that he has been waiting for. We've been waiting for his entire career. A guy that can air the ball out. He can be the deep threat. He can be everything in that offense. And I think it's finally time where we say Terry McLaurin may no longer be capped at, wide receiver 2, wide receiver 3 range at best, and may push into that higher wide receiver 1 territory because of this trade of Jahan Dotson and the other vacated targets in the offense. It'll be interesting to see which one of these guys step up. I want to believe in De'Ami Brown stepping up, really, truly. I want to believe in that.
The dynasty guy in me would love for that to happen. He's just been buried on the bench, never seen the light of day. I would love to see that guy
I want to see it happen. But instead of taking the late round stab at him, or Luke McCaffrey, I just lean into Terry McLaurin and raise him up in, your draft board and take advantage of the extra targets that he's going to see.
I love that. Yeah. So so if people are in cram mode right now, they're looking at this Houston Texans wide receiver group and they're like, what the hell do I do? Like, I got Nico Collins as a third rounder. I got Stephon Diggs in the 5th. And then you got Tank Dell in the 6th or 7th. At cost, like, which one are you kind of targeting and what would you recommend? Or do you avoid the situation altogether? Is this going to be by committee? Like, how do you see this kind of playing out?
I have it somewhat how we have it ranked. I think everyone's kind of in agreement that Nico Collins is the one that you take first off the board.
Alpha.
And then, I don't like Stephon Diggs to be the second guy that I want to take in this offense. I like Tank Dell. That I want to lean into the big play, the upside there. It is a little bit riskier, but we are getting a nice discount there. I don't feel like we're getting enough of a discount on Stephon Diggs, unfortunately. Nico Collins, it's fine. You're drafting him a little bit high, but he has proven to be the guy that can be the wide receiver 1 finish on him. And maybe you're even getting like a slight discount on him because of perception as well. So I'm okay with drafting Nico Collins. I skip right over Stephon Diggs. I'm sorry. I got to do it. And then I am okay with going with Tank Dell as well.
So you heard it here first. Start Collins, bench Stephon Diggs. And cut Stephon Diggs and bench Tank Dell.
There we go.
So who are some of your value picks of the draft and just in general, like as you've been assessing the ADPs and the way this mock draft kind of unfolded, it looks like Calvin Ridley was a guy that you think probably fell a little bit further than he should. What are your thoughts on him and how fantasy managers should approach him?
Yeah, I like where Ridley was. He was in early round 8 of this draft, right behind Chris Godwin, before Deontay Johnson, which the Yahoo draft results told me that I reached on that. I did. Yahoo's correct. I reached on him. But Calvin Ridley right there, and I would have loved to take him right there. I absolutely would have if he was on the board. I feel like for some reason, people are kind of looking at last year and taking it as a failure. And I don't know that last year was really a failure for him. It was a fine year. I think we had higher expectations of him in that Jags offense, being the wide receiver 1, high expectations for Trevor Lawrence. And just everything as a whole just like was lukewarm in terms of what we were looking at. But if you just isolate the season as a whole and look at Calvin Ridley and then transition him over to this Tennessee offense, which to their credit, they did a fantastic job of just overhauling so much in general. The offensive line, they added wide receiver support in addition to Calvin Ridley with Tyler Boyd, the addition of Tony Pollard there. The defense was upgraded as well. So they hit every single aspect of where they needed to improve. And I think that all of these guys, especially Ridley, are good candidates to overperform their ADP. So when I look at Calvin Ridley and his ADP, I'll take it every single time. And if I need to, draft up a little and reach on it, I'm okay with that as well, because we're talking about a guy who has wide receiver 1 potential, and we're drafting him as a wide receiver 3 at best. He's just getting overlooked, and I love the value for him here.
Yeah, I'd also throw in a name in there, Jackson Smith and Jigba. I think with Tyler Lockett's injury right now, he should be going a little bit higher than that round 9. They're still viewing him as a wide receiver 3, but in actuality, with this new offensive coordinator and system in place, I don't know. I think JSN's value is really going up here. So he's going to be a late round guy that I'm going to be for sure targeting. What are your thoughts on Brian Thomas?
Oh, Brian Thomas. This is one that I have come around to throughout preseason. I'm not going to lie, I was worried around when he was drafted and even a little bit before then. I just kind of was worried that we were getting Terrace Marshall 2.0 here. I feel like we've been burned. Yeah, we've been burned a little on this wide receiver too from LSU before. Brings back some bad memories. And so I was just kind of, no, I mean, I like Christian Kirk. I'll take Christian Kirk. I don't, think he'll lead this offense. And the more that I look at it and the more that we've looked at these preseason games, I think that Brian Thomas is the guy that we're going to want at the end of the day, obviously behind a guy like Travis Etienne and even Evan Ingram. But I think that Brian Thomas from the receiving core is going to be the one that we want. I feel like Christian Kirk was a little bit higher in this draft. He went right behind our guy, Terry McLaurin, and before Chris Godwin and Calvin Ridley. And then Brian Thomas, just the value that you're getting in terms of discount. He went round 10. After Curtis Samuel, before Keenan Allen, just wedged in there, right, for a guy who could legitimately be the wide receiver one on his tape, a big play threat, deep touchdown, red zone. There's so much potential there. And the ADP is very appropriate. I was worried that we were going to start seeing his ADP shoot up draft boards and it was going to be a little bit cost prohibitive, but where you're getting him right now, that was another one that I got sniped on right there and then took Keenan Allen. There was some sharp drafting going on in this draft here.
Sharks in the water for sure.
Right?
Like I was the one, I drafted Christian Kirk in round 7. And to be honest with you, I was eyeing Brian Thomas as a late rounder if I didn't get Christian Kirk, and I wound up going Curtis Samuel. So yeah, we would have, even though I was drafting a little bit ahead of you, I probably would have scooped him if I hadn't scooped Christian Kirk before. So I love that call out. Cause I do think there are some vacated targets that, the rookie could easily come in and command right now. And we know that Trevor Lawrence loves to spread the ball, but, I think Christian Kirk definitely could have a solid number 2 right there. Going to be pretty quick with the tight end because I think this was pretty standard, right? I mean, the top tight ends went through rounds 3 and round 6. One thing that stood out to me, I thought Kyle Pitts' slide was pretty interesting. He went in round 8. Matt and I were talking about it on the Bus pod last week in Convictions Week that, Kyle Pitts was carrying a round 5 grade, which was that seemed way too rich for me. I would never buy it at that cost. But round 8, I'm back in on Kyle Pitts. Where are you at with him?
Oh, I'm with you on that one. I mean, tight end just feels as standard as you could physically get this year. It's funny. I was looking across this draft board trying to find some kind of anomaly. I couldn't find anything. All of us just like dead on with tight ends. Very appropriate. And Kyle Pitts slid a little bit. Kate snagged him there in round 8, and I think that's a very appropriate spot for him. The potential there in that Atlanta offense, I've talked about this on the podcast before. Sometimes the Atlanta offense makes me a little uncomfortable because I want to lean into every single one of them. And you start to think like, how can you start to do the math? Right? Like, they're like, okay, carry the 3. I'm not entirely sure if I can get a first round running back at a second. Well, I'm pushing Drake London up to the second round, but a third round, Drake London. Then we got Kyle Pitts. I love Darnell Mooney as a late target. I mean, there's so much here that we're asking of this Atlanta offense, but they play in the NFC South, one of the easiest schedules in the league. So when you're looking at them, every single one of these guys could overperform their ADP.
I totally agree with you. NFC South is trash. So yeah, I'm totally on board. But if you miss out on all of the round 3 through 6 tight ends, I'm more of a Jake Ferguson guy. David Njoku, there are some guys you can still get if you don't strike in those mid to early rounds. So after the break, we're going to get to your fantasy mailbag questions. So continue to tap in. Welcome back. We know for everyone listening to this pod that you're likely going to have your most important drafts in the coming weeks. We're here to help. Welcome to the Fantasy Mailbag.
You've got mail.
When it comes, I want to well.
Goodbye.
For our first submission, Eric sends a voice memo.
Hey guys, love the show. Been listening all throughout the offseason. Just had a question about the onesie positions. In a 10-team full PPR league, wanted to know your strategy when it comes to the quarterback and tight end position. If you had to prioritize taking one or the other early, which would it be? Thank you.
I love this question because I feel like when you're looking at, like we talked about round 3, round 4, and going with those elite tight ends, it's an either or situation. It is tough it's tough to get a Patrick Mahomes and a Travis Kelce because of the way they're all bunched together. So you kind of got to pick and choose which direction you're going here. And again, I think it kind of depends on how you want to shape up your draft, but I, oddly enough, find myself leaning a little bit more into the tight ends, just because when I know you're a late tight end guy, and I get it. Jake Ferguson. He could be the second leading target getter again on that Dallas Cowboys team. But when I'm looking at the ability for me to get Travis Kelce in the 3rd round, a guy that we used to have to draft in the 1st round to get him, it's tough for me to pass up that value. So I'm preferring going with the tight ends earlier in the draft versus getting one of the elite quarterbacks if I have to pick and choose between the two. How about you?
That's fair. That's fair. I'm going to go the other way because I'm just a huge dual threat QB guy. I think you have the advantage against your league mates if you get these Konami code type quarterbacks. I'm not a tight end guy. Just never have been. Why prioritize a position that's going to be so volatile? You could spend a second, third round pick. And honestly, Travis Kelce, I love him. He's great. He's wonderful. But this guy is aging. He's in decline. The Chiefs decide to invest in their wide receiver room for a reason. I'm just saying, just lock in that stud quarterback and and worry about tight end down the line. You'll be fine.
I get it. We'll talk off the pod. I'll convince you to come over to my side.
Our second submission comes from Joe from DC. What's up, Joe? Love DC, love Chocolate City. He sends his voice memo.
I'm in a league that's very custom, 14 teams, 2 QBs, point per first down, auction draft. So off-the-shelf rankings don't really work. And I'm curious, how do you think about translating things like rankings into auction values? Obviously, you can use projections and do something really complicated, but some to some extent that's not applicable. So really appreciate any advice you have. Thanks a lot. Bye.
Good question.
I love
Do you want to
this.
take a stab at that one first?
Yeah, this is the perfect situation to look at rankings and ignore the numbers and look at tiers in the rankings. That's
Boom.
this is the time where you need to look at the tiers and try and predict, because when you're in a 14 team, like when I'm in a 10 team league, I can kind of predict who's going to come around to me. I can say, I don't need to take Zay Flowers right here because I can get Zay Flowers next round. I'm pretty sure he's going to make it back to me. But when you're in a team like a 14-team league, that's when things predicting out and kind of trying to figure out where the draft is going to head and if your guy's going to be there, it's going to be kind of difficult, even multiple ranges. So I feel like this is the perfect opportunity to look at tiers. And the easiest one for me to use an example, I hate to keep us on the tight end train here, but it's the easiest example to do off the top of your head. Tight end tiers are so clear cut this year, and it makes it so easy for you to decide, am I an elite tight end kind of person? I know that I can, say, hey, I'm taking Kelce through McBride, and I'm taking it in this range. And if I miss out on that, I'm not going to reach on a George Kittle, right? Because he's in the next tier. So when you've got these teams and you can 14 team leagues and you can figure out these tiers, you can understand, like, if I miss out on this, the next tier that I'm interested in is the tier with the Jake Ferguson, is the tier with the Brock Bowers. I want to grab right there and feel comfortable with that. So that's the best way for me to, especially in auction, right? I feel like tiers are a great way to approach it. So yeah, you keep the rankings, but you just kind of put your hand over the numbers and use tiers and say, these are the guys that I'm comfortable with, and here's where I won't reach.
Yeah, I think that's spot on. No notes. This is about tiering. This is not a traditional league. You can't do traditional things. Bucket the guys as you see them and as you value them. If there's runs, especially when I participate in 14-team leagues, you'll see the run on quarterbacks go. That's an opportunity for you to pivot. So, I would just say actually, this is an auction draft, so you don't have to worry about that. But I would say, yeah, look at the tiers. That's sound advice from Tera there. Just a reminder to everyone, the fantasy mailbag is open for business for the rest of August. You can tweet at me, you can tweet at Matt, Tera, the rest of the fantasy football crew, and you'll get bumped to the front of the line by submitting your questions via voice memo or video to the fantasy mailbag at yahoosports.com. Our goal is to get to the most questions, as many questions as possible. So hit us up, fantasymailbag at yahoosports.com. Also, week 1 is less than 2 weeks away, y'all. And as you know, through all the countless live reads, we've got a little thing going on with NBC this year. If you sign up for a fantasy league on Yahoo Fantasy, you'll automatically be entered to win $1 million. That's right, a milli. $1 million. If any of the players you start score a touchdown in week 1 of the games on NBC and Peacock, you'll earn bonus entries into the sweepstakes. The deadline to start a team is September 5th, so make sure you do that ASAP if you want a chance to take home $1 million. That's going to do it for us today. On Tuesday, we're going to continue to cram this week by recapping the entire preseason Until then, we are out.